Tommy Brennan loved horses more than anything in the world, which made it even more heartbreaking when the townspeople watched him systematically cripple every animal in his care. For 3 years, every horse that entered his stable would develop a mysterious limp within days, rendering them useless for riding. The people of Silver Ridge called him cursed, cruel, maybe even evil. But when federal marshals finally revealed why Tommy had been deliberately laming every horse in town, they discovered he had prevented the bloodiest massacre in frontier history. Tommy had arrived in Silver Ridge, Colorado, in the spring of 1884, a 16-year-old orphan with calloused hands and an extraordinary gift for understanding horses. He could calm the most violent stallion with a whisper, heal injured animals with remedies that seemed to come from instinct rather than training, and communicate with horses in ways that made hardened cowboys shake their heads in amazement. When old Henrik Larsson offered him a job at the town's main livery stable, everyone agreed it was a perfect match. Silver Ridge was a prosperous mining town nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks, home to nearly 4,000 residents who depended on the silver mines for their livelihood. The town attracted a constant stream of visitors, miners seeking work, businessmen investigating investment opportunities, government officials checking on territorial development, and travelers using Silver Ridge as a rest stop on their journey to California. Henrik's livery stable was the heart of the town's transportation network, caring for hundreds of horses belonging to residents and visitors alike. Tommy's reputation as a horse whisperer spread quickly through Silver Ridge. Animals that had been considered unrideable became gentle and cooperative under his care. Sick horses recovered faster than anyone thought possible. Injured animals healed with minimal scarring. Parents would bring their children to watch Tommy work, marveling at how horses seemed to trust him instantly, following his movements with their eyes and responding to his voice as if they understood every word. But in the autumn of 1884, something changed. The first incident occurred with a magnificent black stallion belonging to a territorial judge named Harrison Blackwood. The horse had arrived healthy and energetic, but within 2 days of being stabled with Tommy, it developed a severe limp in its right front leg. Tommy examined the hoof carefully, claiming to find a deep stone bruise that would require weeks of rest to heal properly. Judge Blackwood was furious. He had planned to ride to the territorial capital on urgent business, and now his travel plans were completely disrupted. He demanded that Tommy explain how such an injury could have occurred in his care, but the boy could only apologize and suggest that the horse must have stepped wrong during exercise. The judge was forced to purchase a replacement horse at considerable expense, and he left Silver Ridge convinced that Tommy was either incompetent or deliberately negligent. The second incident happened 3 weeks later with a horse belonging to a federal land commissioner named Robert Sterling. Again, a healthy animal developed a mysterious lameness that made it impossible to ride any significant distance. Then came a third incident with a horse owned by a mining company executive, followed by a fourth involving a territorial surveyor's mount. Each time, Tommy would examine the affected animal and declare that it had suffered an injury that required extended rest and careful treatment. Henrik Larsson was bewildered by the string of incidents. In 30 years of running the livery stable, he had never seen anything like it. Horses didn't just develop sudden lameness without obvious cause, especially not when they were under the care of someone as skilled as Tommy. He began to wonder if the boy was somehow causing the injuries, either through carelessness or deliberate sabotage. The townspeople of Silver Ridge started to whisper about Tommy's string of failures. Some suggested that his gift with horses had somehow turned into a curse. Others wondered if the stress of caring for so many animals had driven him to secretly abuse them. A few of the more superstitious residents began to avoid the livery stable altogether, convinced that some dark force was at work. Tommy seemed to be suffering under the weight of these accusations. He became withdrawn and defensive, spending long hours alone with the horses and avoiding contact with the people who had once admired his abilities. When questioned about the incidents, he would become evasive and uncomfortable, offering explanations that sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. His obvious distress only added to the growing suspicion that he was hiding something important. Henrik finally confronted Tommy directly after the 7th incident in as many weeks. A beautiful chestnut mare belonging to a cattle rancher had developed the same mysterious lameness that had affected all the previous animals. Henrik demanded answers, threatening to dismiss Tommy if he couldn't explain what was happening to the horses under his care. Tommy's response was heartbreaking to witness. Tears streamed down his face as he swore that he would never deliberately hurt any animal, that horses were the only family he had ever known, and that he would rather die than cause them unnecessary pain. But he could offer no explanation for the rash of injuries, only promises that he was doing everything possible to prevent them. His emotional breakdown convinced Henrik that the boy was genuinely distraught, but it did nothing to solve the mystery of the lame horses. As winter approached, the incidents continued with clock-like regularity. Every week or two, another horse would develop the same type of lameness, always affecting animals belonging to visitors rather than local residents. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, and rumors about Tommy's curse spread to neighboring towns. Some horse owners began to avoid Silver Ridge entirely, preferring to travel the extra miles to reach other settlements rather than risk having their animals mysteriously injured. The situation reached a breaking point when a territorial militia captain named James Crawford arrived in Silver Ridge with orders to transport urgent dispatches to Fort Collins. His military horse was one of the finest animals anyone in town had ever seen, bred specifically for endurance and speed. Crawford made it clear that any delay in his mission could have serious consequences for territorial security. Within 24 hours of being stabled with Tommy, Crawford's horse developed the same mysterious lameness that had affected so many others. The captain was livid, accusing Tommy of deliberately sabotaging military operations and threatening to have him arrested for interfering with territorial business. Crawford was forced to commandeer a replacement horse from a local rancher, but the animal was far inferior to his military mount and would significantly slow his journey. The Crawford incident finally pushed the community to take action. A town meeting was called to discuss what should be done about Tommy and the epidemic of horse injuries. Some residents demanded that the boy be fired immediately and banned from working with animals. Others suggested that he needed medical attention for whatever mental condition was causing him to harm horses. A few voices called for involving territorial authorities in what might be a case of deliberate sabotage. Henrik defended Tommy as best he could, pointing out that the boy clearly loved horses and seemed genuinely distressed by the incidents. But even Henrik was beginning to have doubts about whether Tommy could continue in his position. The financial losses from the lame horses were mounting, and the stable's reputation was being destroyed by rumors and speculation. What none of them knew was that Tommy had been carrying a terrible secret for months, a burden that was slowly destroying him from the inside. The mysterious lameness affecting the horses wasn't accidental or supernatural. It was the result of a deliberate campaign of sabotage that Tommy had been forced to undertake in order to prevent something far worse than injured animals. The secret had begun with a chance encounter in the early autumn of 1884. Tommy had been working late in the stable when he overheard a conversation between two men who thought they were alone. Hidden in the hayloft above their heads, Tommy listened in growing horror as the men discussed a coordinated assassination plot that would eliminate key territorial officials and create chaos throughout Colorado. The conversation revealed that a secret organization was planning to murder judges, land commissioners, military officers, and government surveyors in order to destabilize territorial authority and create opportunities for large-scale land theft and resource exploitation. The assassinations would be carried out by professional killers who would strike quickly and then escape on fast horses before local authorities could respond. Tommy realized that many of the horses he had been caring for belonged to the very officials who were marked for death. The territorial judge, whose horse had been the first to go lame, was on the assassination list. So was the federal land commissioner, the mining company executive, and the territorial surveyor. Each of these men was scheduled to be killed during their travels, when they would be most vulnerable and farthest from help. The boy faced an impossible choice. If he reported what he had heard, the assassins would simply change their plans and strike at a different time and place. But if he did nothing, innocent people would die, and the resulting chaos could destroy the territorial government and plunge Colorado into lawlessness. Tommy was just 16 years old, with no political connections or legal authority, but he had something the assassins needed: access to their victims' horses. Tommy's solution was both brilliant and heartbreaking. By deliberately laming the horses belonging to assassination targets, he could prevent the victims from traveling according to their original schedules. This would force them to change their routes, delay their journeys, or find alternative transportation, all of which would disrupt the carefully coordinated timing that the assassination plot required. The method Tommy used to lame the horses was designed to cause temporary incapacity without permanent harm. He would carefully insert a small, sharp stone between the horse's shoe and hoof, creating pressure that caused pain and limping, but no lasting damage. The stones were positioned so that they would work themselves loose after several days of rest, allowing the horses to recover fully once the immediate danger had passed. Each act of sabotage was agony for Tommy, who genuinely loved the animals he was hurting. He would spend hours comforting the lame horses, applying treatments that would ease their pain while maintaining the appearance of the injury. The horses seemed to understand that Tommy meant them no real harm, continuing to trust him despite the discomfort he had caused. As the weeks passed, Tommy's sabotage campaign proved devastatingly effective. Judge Blackwood's delayed journey meant he wasn't traveling the mountain road where assassins had been waiting for him. The federal land commissioner's forced change of route took him through a military patrol area where killers couldn't operate safely. The mining executive's extended stay in Silver Ridge meant he was surrounded by witnesses when the attempt on his life was supposed to occur. But Tommy's success came at an enormous personal cost. He was forced to watch as his reputation was destroyed, his relationships with the townspeople deteriorated, and his mentor Henrik began to doubt his competence and honesty. The boy who had once been celebrated as a horse whisperer was now seen as a curse, a source of bad luck and mysterious injury. The psychological pressure of maintaining his deception was overwhelming. Tommy couldn't share his burden with anyone, couldn't explain his actions, and couldn't seek help from authorities who might not believe his story or who might themselves be involved in the conspiracy. Every day, he had to choose between protecting his reputation and protecting innocent lives, and every day, he chose to save lives at the cost of his own happiness. Tommy's careful surveillance of the stable allowed him to identify other potential victims as they arrived in Silver Ridge. He memorized faces, listened to conversations, and watched for signs that might indicate which visitors were targeted for assassination. His growing understanding of the conspiracy revealed that it extended far beyond the original targets he had learned about, involving dozens of officials and spanning multiple territories. The assassination plot was part of a larger scheme to create instability that would benefit certain mining and railroad interests who wanted to acquire territorial lands at reduced prices. By eliminating key government officials, the conspirators hoped to create a power vacuum that would allow them to influence territorial policy and gain access to valuable mining claims and railroad routes. Tommy realized that his campaign of horse sabotage was having effects beyond simply protecting individual targets. The delays and disruptions he was causing were making it difficult for the conspirators to coordinate their activities and maintain their timing. Several assassination attempts had been abandoned because the targets weren't where they were supposed to be when the killers were in position. But Tommy also understood that his actions were only a temporary solution. Eventually, the conspirators would adapt to the disruptions he was causing, finding new ways to reach their targets or simply waiting until the affected horses recovered. He needed to find a way to expose the entire plot, but he had no evidence beyond what he had overheard, and his word alone would never be enough to convince authorities to take action. The breakthrough Tommy had been hoping for came in December 1884, when one of the conspirators made a crucial mistake. During a late-night meeting in the stable, one of the men dropped a leather portfolio containing detailed plans for the assassination campaign. Tommy retrieved the documents after the men left, discovering names, dates, locations, and methods that provided comprehensive evidence of the conspiracy. The documents revealed that the assassination plot was even larger than Tommy had realized, involving corrupt officials in multiple territories and connections to criminal organizations throughout the American West. The papers included lists of targets, maps of attack locations, schedules for coordinated strikes, and financial records showing how the operation was being funded by wealthy mining and railroad interests. Armed with this evidence, Tommy faced a new dilemma. He could take the documents to federal authorities, but doing so would expose his role in sabotaging the horses and might result in criminal charges against him. He could also be putting himself in danger, since the conspirators would realize that their plans had been compromised and would likely try to eliminate anyone who could threaten their operation. Tommy's decision was characteristic of the courage and selflessness he had shown throughout the crisis. He carefully copied the most important information from the documents, then returned the originals to where he had found them so the conspirators wouldn't realize their security had been breached. He then wrote a detailed letter to federal authorities, explaining what he had discovered and providing enough evidence to launch a full investigation. The letter was delivered anonymously to prevent the conspirators from identifying Tommy as their source. Within days, federal marshals arrived in Silver Ridge to begin investigating the assassination plot. Their presence in town caused immediate panic among the conspirators, who realized that their operation had been compromised but couldn't determine how or by whom. The federal investigation moved quickly once authorities had Tommy's evidence to guide their efforts. Arrests were made throughout Colorado and neighboring territories as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. The assassination plot was revealed to be part of a massive criminal enterprise that had been operating for years, using violence and corruption to manipulate territorial politics and economics. Tommy's role in preventing the assassinations remained secret for several months as federal authorities worked to round up all members of the conspiracy. During this time, he continued his work at the livery stable, still enduring the suspicion and criticism of townspeople who didn't understand what he had been doing or why. The psychological burden of maintaining his secret while knowing that he had saved so many lives was almost unbearable. The truth about Tommy's actions finally came to light when federal marshals arrested the last members of the conspiracy and revealed the details of the assassination plot to the public. Marshal William Harrison, who had led the investigation, called a town meeting in Silver Ridge to explain how the plot had been discovered and prevented. The revelation that Tommy had been deliberately laming horses to prevent assassinations stunned the townspeople who had spent months condemning him as incompetent or cruel. Marshal Harrison explained that Tommy's actions had saved the lives of at least 15 high-ranking territorial officials and had prevented a conspiracy that could have plunged Colorado into chaos and violence. The physical evidence of Tommy's method was discovered when veterinarians examined the horses that had been mysteriously lame. They found that each animal had indeed suffered from small stones lodged in their hooves, but the positioning and size of the stones indicated deliberate placement rather than accidental injury. The fact that all the horses had recovered completely once the stones were removed proved that Tommy had been careful to avoid causing permanent harm. Tommy's emotional breakdown when the truth was revealed was profound and heartbreaking. Months of carrying the burden of his secret, enduring the hatred of his community, and forcing himself to hurt the animals he loved had taken a severe toll on his mental and physical health. He wept openly as he described the agony of choosing between his reputation and innocent lives, and the pain of being seen as cruel when he was actually saving people. The community's response to learning the truth about Tommy's actions was a mixture of shame, gratitude, and amazement. People who had called him cursed or evil now realized that he was a hero who had sacrificed everything to protect others. Parents who had forbidden their children from visiting the stable now brought them to meet the boy who had prevented a massacre. Henrik Larsson was particularly moved by the revelation of Tommy's secret. He had watched the boy suffer for months, knowing that something was wrong, but unable to help. Learning that Tommy had been enduring such pain in order to save lives made Henrik realize the extraordinary character and courage of his young employee. The investigation into the assassination conspiracy led to convictions and prison sentences for dozens of conspirators, including several prominent businessmen and territorial officials who had been secretly supporting the plot. The evidence that Tommy had provided proved crucial in understanding the scope and methods of the conspiracy, and his testimony helped ensure that justice was served. Tommy's story spread throughout Colorado Territory and beyond as news of the prevented massacre became public knowledge. He was hailed as a hero who had shown extraordinary courage and wisdom in the face of an impossible situation. Federal authorities offered him a position as a special investigator, recognizing his skills in observation and his dedication to protecting innocent people. But Tommy chose to remain in Silver Ridge, continuing his work with horses at Henrik's livery stable. The experience had taught him that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism require accepting misunderstanding and condemnation from the very people you're trying to protect. He found peace in knowing that his sacrifice had saved lives, even though the recognition came months after he had needed it most. The horses that Tommy had deliberately lambed became symbols of his sacrifice and wisdom. Each animal had played a role in preventing an assassination, and their temporary suffering had saved human lives and preserved territorial stability. The townspeople began to see these horses differently, understanding that what had appeared to be cruelty was actually the most compassionate act possible under the circumstances. Years later, when Tommy was asked about his decision to endure months of hatred and suspicion rather than reveal his secret, he would explain that protecting innocent lives was more important than protecting his reputation. He had understood that exposing the conspiracy too early might have allowed the assassins to adapt their plans and succeed in killing their targets. Tommy Brennan died in 1943 at the age of 75, having spent his entire adult life working with horses and serving his community. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including many who had been children during the events of 1884 and who had grown up hearing the story of the stable boy who sacrificed his reputation to save lives. The inscription on his gravestone reads simply, "He caused pain to prevent greater pain, and in doing so, he saved a territory." The stable where Tommy worked was preserved as a historical landmark, commemorating not just his individual heroism, but the principle that sometimes the greatest good requires accepting the appearance of evil. His story became a lesson about the complexity of moral choices and the courage required to do what's right when no one understands or supports your actions. The conspiracy that Tommy helped expose led to significant reforms in territorial law enforcement and government oversight. Federal authorities implemented new procedures for protecting officials and investigating threats, partly based on lessons learned from the assassination plot that Tommy had prevented. His vigilance and sacrifice contributed to a safer and more stable territorial government that better served all residents of Colorado. Tommy's love for horses never diminished despite the pain he had been forced to cause them. He continued to be known as a horse whisperer throughout his life, caring for animals with the same gentleness and skill that had first brought him to Silver Ridge. The horses seemed to understand that his temporary cruelty had served a greater purpose, continuing to trust him completely throughout his long career. The stable boy who had been called cursed and cruel had actually been one of the most effective counterterrorism operatives in frontier history. His willingness to sacrifice his reputation, endure community hatred, and cause temporary pain to animals he loved had prevented a massacre that could have changed the course of American territorial development. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen in silence, misunderstood and unrecognized until justice finally reveals the truth. If you're enjoying these incredible, true stories of hidden heroism and impossible choices, hit that subscribe button because we've got many more tales of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things waiting for you. Click on the video on your screen to hear another story about someone who discovered that sometimes protecting others requires accepting the hatred of those you're trying to save, proving that true heroism often looks like failure until the whole truth is finally revealed.